soon be taking a guided tour of the magnificent Certosa di Pisa, splendid Baroque 17th century structure. The origins of this Certosa are of the 14th century. A Certosa, it is a monastic edifice where the Certosini live. The name Certosa comes from the French Grande Chartreuse. This was a monastic building in the French Alps near Grenoble, in which San Ugo lived with 6 followers, united together in a life of contemplation and prayer in the 11th century. Italy has, I believe, about close to 24 Certose, the most famous being probably the Certosa di Pisa. This is the splendid Certosa di Pisa. We're now following our guide into the Certosa, founded in 1366, this Certosa, by an Armenian. And its wealth will increase over the centuries thanks to the donations of noble Pisa families. Absolutely splendid structure. Much restoration over many periods of time. So the theme of the building now is certainly Baroque. Up, we see Monte Verruca in the distance. And then we go to the splendid Certosa. In the mid-1900s, the last 3 monks leave the Certosa. And now, in the structure, is a museum of natural history. And all these frescoes are 17th century, as our guide is telling us.
We're entering into the church of the Certosa, and like all the churches of every Certosa, there are 3 distinct ambiances. There is the presbytery and this coro, where the priests would be. And in this area, just as you enter, is the area where the Certosini conversi prayed, those who were dedicating their life to work, although they too had taken vows. And then we walk into the chapel, and this is called the Coro dei Padri, the choir area of the fathers, the priests. And there they are novitiates for about 7 years until they take their final vows and they become priests. And all the frescoes, beautifully done, are 17th century. The church was founded in 1368 thanks to the donation of a generous Pisa citizen. And the frescoes were part of the restoration of this church in the 17th century, when the vaults were created and new, wider windows were created. The choir stalls in wood are extremely beautiful. They were done by a woodworker from Lucca in the 15th century. And our guide explained to us that the woodwork also included some beautiful inlay. She's talking to us about the frescoes on the walls and on the ceilings, and we can see the windows up there, which were enlarged with the restoration of the 17th century when those vaults up there were created. And the whole ambience is absolutely splendid Baroque. And we're going to see also over the altar a painting. In just a second, we'll zero in on it. Right now, I'd like to show you the choir stall. There's Pino listening, quite fascinated to our guide, very interested in the woodwork. You can see there's inlay as well as sculpture in this wooden choir stall of the 15th century. And now our eyes move towards the altar. And the altar area is called the presbytery, and over the altar is the painting by Baldassare Franceschini, done in 1681, and it depicts the Virgin being entrusted with the Certosa by San Bruno, the founder of the first Certosa. So Franceschini's painting of 1681.
Speaking to us about one of the 15 cappelle contemplative called contemplative chapels. Each of the Certosino, who was a contemplative or a priest that is dedicated to prayer and study, was required to say Mass himself in a chapel. And so 15 cappelle contemplative flank the main chapel where they gathered together in community. Original marble floor of the 17th century, and I'm walking through some of the cappelle contemplative. So in each chapel, a Certosino priest alone would close himself and say Mass. And here we have a painting of the founder, Saint Bruno, 12th century, Grenoble, France, French mountains. A painting by Jacopo Vignati. We see San Bruno, founder of the Certosini, at the end of the 11th century. In a typical habit of the Certosini, he seems to be praying in an isolated woods. This is called an altare privilegiato perpetuo, and the guide has told me because special masses will be said at this altar for special intentions requested by people. So this is the cappella dedicated to San Bruno, founder of the Certosini, the monks who will live in community in a certosa. This room was not only a chapel, but it was the meeting room. And the priest would sit here, the padre, and give information, or shall we say orders, to the fratelli conversi who did all the outdoor work. And they would be sitting in upright pews, so they paid good attention and careful attention to the Certosino priest who would be speaking to them here from the pulpit. Again, magnificent Baroque architecture and paintings, but as our guide said, these beautiful colors of pale pinks and whites, a little bit more of a lay flavor because this was also a meeting room. Chapel of the Colloquio, la Cappella del Colloquio, actually the Cappella di Santa Caterina. We have a painting over the altar. The Certosini could talk together for, I believe, 1 hour a week. And we have some beautiful sculpture here done at the end of the 15th century by a Lombard artisan who worked in wood. So the chapel of the Colloquio, la Cappella del Colloquio, the chapel of the chat. Now we're in the Grande Chiostro, the great immense cloister surrounding the Certosa. And our guide has just explained that inside each door was the cell of one of the 15 contemplative Certosini, and through that door food would be passed to them by one of the 25 conversi Certosini, those who did the work and took care of other tasks, while others in the community were withdrawn for prayer and meditation. Over the fountain in the center, we have the angel holding the 7 stars, and symbol of the founding of the Certosini, as San Bruno withdrew in the 11th century with 6 others for prayer and contemplation. Very peaceful and quiet. The cloister, the Grande Chiostro. Into the cell now, one of the contemplatives. This was the well of this one here. They might have had small fruit trees here. The major garden was not here. It was cared for in another area by the conversi, the Certosini conversi, those who were dedicated to work. Ambiances here are quite large. This was the area of one of the Certosino contemplative who spent his time in prayer and meditation, perhaps study. This was his bedroom. This was a study room, a place where he ate with a large fireplace. And we were quite astounded, I was, especially after seeing the Franciscan monasteries. And our guide here has told us that this was funded very much by wealthy Tuscan families. And the size of the ambiances is showing off what they're able to do for these Certosini. Of the cell, which we've just visited. Here is the entrance with a fresco over the door. And this is the little window through which the Fratello Converso would have provided the food for the contemplative Certosino in there. 7 years novitiate for contemplativo, 5 years novitiate for a converso, our guide just told us. And here goes our group walking back through the magnificent, grandioso, as we can call it, chiostro. Magnificent, great grandeur. Splendid refectory, and our guide has just showed us some magnificent paintings here on the wall. Here we can see the marriage feast of Cana. Over the altar, Last Supper. Over the head table, shall we say, where the prior would be sitting, the Last Supper. Here we have the feet of Christ being washed the night before his crucifixion. And here we have the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Leopold, joining the prior, the head of the Certosini, who's on his right. And opposite that, we have Caterina de' Medici, and she is serving the Certosini herself. She's in the blue gown. We can see the Certosini hooded, eating their meal. And this indicates the importance of this Certosa to nobility, important personalities who were often hosted here, including the Grand Duke of Austria, Gustav II of Sweden. Many important European rulers were hosted here in the great Certosa. This is the magnificent refectory. Now we leave the great refectory or refettorio of the Certosa, the splendor again, indicating the splendor of all the Certosa. Into the foresteria, the place where external visitors could be hosted. And this is very elegant because very important guests were often invited to stay here at the Certosa. The only person having contact with them would have been the prior or the head of the order. We're going into the apartment now, which was that of the Granduca della Toscana, the great Duke of Tuscany. So we're talking about the rulers of Tuscany in the 18th century. A quick glimpse at the countryside. And in we go to the apartment of the Gran Duca of Toscana. We're in a Certosa, which is a place of prayer and meditation for the Certosini, the friars, but everywhere here, elegance. Scusi.
Dal 1765 al 1790, quindi un periodo di regno molto lungo durante il quale in effetti compì pochissime visite. Qui in Certosa, in rapporto alla lunghezza del suo regno, si contano 4-5 visite del Granduca insieme anche alle sue.
So every single aspect of our tour of the Certosa has indicated elegance.
Come dicevo prima, le donne di alto rango avevano dispense particolari che permettevano loro di accedere ai monasteri certosini, quindi ovviamente non siamo in una clausura stretta, siamo in una stanza di ospitalità.
This is a room of hospitality, not of enclosure. And there is Pietro Leopoldo, Granduca della Toscana.